So, in light of that Shinny video and basically the Loose Women programme that Starmer was on, and the whole issue around Talking Pints, Farage, all the social media and the election laws and, everything around MPs being on TV, the whole thing towards that, right, is this. So, really, the major parties have had it, they've been spoiled, basically, and they've had the advantage of being able to basically get people into Parliament and stand just because people basically put the coloured shirt on, whether they put the green or blue on for Labour or the Tories, depending on which area it is, right? And they've had this. They've been very lucky and fortunate that people just grouped and flocked together, right? And that's the way they've ended up kind of shaping politics. And they've sold it to the public, and they've shaped parliamentary proceedings. Can be moulded and shaped really any way you want, but they've sold it to the public always and lied and misled them that it has to be these two parties, right? When it doesn't at all. And it's these type of lies and misleading that are very clear in the committee reports. Now, obviously, in the 1600s and 1700s, when fewer people voted and only people who had lands and so forth, right, I think we were very lucky to have all the rights that we've got. But remember, they had the death penalty then, so it was quite severe if you got, prosecuted when you hadn't done anything wrong or when you were doing a lawful process. There was a lot of serious penalties, right? So it was quite important. But it's not just the fact of, making sure that you don't get killed when you're engaging in something lawful or proper, right? It's the fact that you actually, either you're doing it or you're not, and you actually are using a lawful process. Now, when the Luddites kicked off because they weren't getting paid that much, right, and all the factory owners were starting to, make these bigger factories, and they were getting losing their skills but getting paid less money, and more people were getting put under employment, and there were less people petitioning about independent, trade, lots of trade petitions, about, merchants and produce and taxes and all these type of things. And as more people work for factories, then less people did those type of petitions. But you see, this is when the Luddites kicked off, but they weren't kicking off about the vote. There was no women's vote issue at that point with the Luddites. It was all about money, right? But they had the right to petition, and they could complain about things or ask for things. You didn't necessarily need to vote. And remember, parliaments were called less often, right? So when you don't have a parliament and you want something done in the law, or an act of law made or changed, or taxes changed, or you've got a grievance about a local or personal issue that you couldn't get resolved locally, right? Then you would petition the king or the council, because they didn't have a parliament, right? And you were using that lawful process if you couldn't get a resolution from the courts, and you usually petition the king with a bill of exemption if the judges were messing you around, right, and not being honest. So you see, you got this right to redress grievances, whether or not there are MPs are called or not. Now, when you call the MPs, right, you're not having to go to the trouble of everyone doing it themselves, right? Because they're going to go represent for you, for the areas, right? That's the whole point. And they were only called at certain times. Now, when there's a lot less MPs, it doesn't really matter whether they associate with parties or not, because there's so much fewer of them. And each area of the country is going to have unique or particular problems that are unique to that area. Like whether it's Herefordshire, has got all lot of beer growing, hops, and it had all the orchards and things like that. So when you get MPs going into Parliament from Herefordshire, right, they're going to have completely different issues to want to represent for their county when it comes to the making and changing of laws and taxes and things than, for example, someone in Plymouth, right, when it was mainly fishing and, the ocean, and sailing and like, boats and the naval vessels and all stuff like that. And then you've got someone, maybe up in Edinburgh or Scotland, if they were, whatever they were doing, I don't know whether they were growing blackberries or, raspberries or whatever the hell they do up Scotland, or even if it's farming, right, in sheep. And then when you've got cities which had the corporations and they started to get mayors, and they stopped having the assizes circuits going around because they had like a permanent mayor and alderman, right? And you've got metropolises, you've got different issues for, high levels of crime, things like that. They got the liberties of the city, which are under particular different rules and rights and regulations for the cities. And you've got a lot more merchants and traders in and around the city areas and shops, whereas in the countryside you might have some weavers and traders, but depending on where it was, it varied, right? So your MPs in Parliament are all going to have very unique issues to do with which area they're at, and you got to know the area very well, right? Because there's very unique and particular things in that area which need to be represented in Parliament, right? And you also had 2 MPs from each shire. And I don't know how they did it, but I've kind of got a feeling now that one of the MPs might have been in the area so he could see people while they was in Parliament, and they switched. I don't know whether they both went to Parliament at the same time and came back, but it must have been difficult to hold the surgeries and do the timing for it if it takes that a long time to go to London. And I don't know if how they did the voting, but William Prynne was talking about that if someone couldn't be in Parliament, then you've got a right to have someone to vote on their behalf. So I don't know if that had something to do with the 2 Knights of the Shire or not. I don't know. Like, if one of the Knights of the Shire couldn't be there or was seeing the constituents, I don't know if the other Knight could vote on his behalf or not for him in Parliament. You'll have to look into that. But obviously, if there wasn't anyone at the surgery, obviously maybe that you could see his office staff instead. If if you couldn't get a meeting with him himself, the MP, then at least he had some staff there, because you want to talk to someone, and it's always better to talk to someone in person than write a letter, because you can get your point across more thoroughly in person rather than just writing. Now, obviously, as you've got you've got in Parliament, you've got like the government, like they vote for a prime minister and they choose the speaker and they have an attorney general, and then they choose the ministers, and then that's the crown. That is the government, the crown, the ministers, and then all the rest are meant to be the opposition to what the crown are wanting to do, right? But then they gradually changed it so they become these parties, when you got the Whigs and the Tories, right? And then obviously later on the Liberals. But there was always been actually quite a lot of, they always did have independent MPs. Now, after the Luddites kicked off about the minimum wage and the Parliament wouldn't raise it for them, right? Then you go into the period with the suffragettes and the women wanting the vote. Now, like I said, right, when they didn't always have MPs and there wasn't always a Parliament, you weren't voting, because you weren't voting for any MPs because you didn't have any. So no one would be complaining that they didn't have a vote when there wasn't any voting because they didn't have a Parliament, right? So when you do not have a Parliament and you do not have MPs going to Parliament, but you've still got a country that's running and operating, right? And if you got something must grumble about a grievance, or you've got an idea for a law or something like that, you could petition the king, right? That's the whole point. If you can't get resolution through the courts, right? Now that's the point here, right? You don't actually need MPs in Parliament to do that, which is your observation of due process of law, right? 1368. And then there's no problem with the women's vote because they aren't voting for anyone, right? If you you got to get your head around this, right? If you've got a country and you've got your courts operating on circuits with judges that go back to Tower of London, right, in the King, but then you don't have to go through the courts if it's a matter of the whole country, a national matter, right? Then but there is no parliament called, and there isn't going to be a parliament called for the next like two year, right? You don't have any MPs, right? And no one's going to go any elections and voting. So it's got absolutely sweet F-A, fuck all, sweet fuck all to do with 1, MPs, 2, political parties, 3, elections, right? Absolutely nothing to do with them. You know, clock out and go home, right? So what have you got? Well, you don't have anyone complaining about the right to vote because there aren't any fucking elections on and no one's getting voted for, right? Everyone can petition the king, whether you're a man, woman or fucking child, right? And everyone can go into court and get some sort of resolution at the petty sessions or assizes when the judges come round, if they're all honest or whatever. And if your judge has been a crooked, dishonest liar, then you can challenge him on the law by the king, right? Because you've got the Bill of Exception, right? So you don't actually need the right to vote because there might not be any voting going on, and you don't need anyone to represent you, right? Now, when they started to get these, when they started to call these parliaments and then get MPs, and you got to vote for them. Now, obviously, like I said earlier, you know, you've got landscape and resources of the country varied dramatically, and counties tended to specialise in very different things, right? So the MPs definitely would need to know their area, and they all had very, very, very unique and individual needs, right? It wasn't just like town, like some kind of like rubber stamping it, copy and pasting, you know, copy and paste Coventry, copy and paste Leicester. Because you've got all these trades and industries dying out now because it's just kind of like standardising. This is what they want to do, standardise everything. So it's like, you know, don't matter whether it's Luton, Coventry, whatever, it's just like a rubber stamp. It's like, you know, it's like, you know, it's just like, industry, you know, random industry, you know, it's just like, copy paste, you know, town, right? You know, type name of town, right? So like, you know, town, right? Type name of town. Now copy and paste Coventry, copy and paste Birmingham, copy and paste Herefordshire. They just want it like a copy and paste thing. They don't want England to be any. They don't have any caricature or any variety of difference. They just want it to be a copy and paste everywhere. Oh, more businesses, airplane factories, airports, copy paste, right? There's no style, there's no panache. There's not like Herefordshire. Wow, look at this. It's a very strange land of orchards and, hops and all whatever, right? And then you go to the Lake District and it's all like hill mountains and lakes and stuff like that. They just want it copy paste, industry, copy paste, industry, copy paste, industry, you know. Got a mosque, church, Buddhist temple, a couple of factories, airplane factory, airport, bus station, modern state of the art fucking highways, England, copy paste. And what you got left is just crap. It's not no identity, but they're making tons of money out of it, and they jet off to their fucking Bahamas retreats, and they couldn't give a flying fuck about what the country looks like, right? So, as these factories start to accumulate and take over from people's individual skills and trades, and there's a lot less petitions from individual people, right? And then it's the factories start doing the because they've got all the money and they can afford to get the lawyers, and then they're actually doing private bills, specially tailored private bills, like the Savile Row of petitioning, right? Doing private bills, right? And then you've also got the corporations, which have got the permanent mayor and alderman and so forth, and they don't need the assizes and quarter sessions if you get a town, because you the mayor of London, you got a permanent court there, right? And then they're starting, and unfortunately they start to do loads of deals and get relationships with these water companies, bus, all these services. That they start doing deals with the council and getting contracts. Now, I don't know how you get a fair trial in a council when they've got loads of deals, contracts and so forth with the applicants that you're opposing, because to me that's corrupt, right? So you could say that the corporations very quickly became corrupt, because if you've got the assizes coming round, and then you call a random jury, and they're like, okay, then can we raise some taxes for the roads? Who's going to fix it, right? And then the jury say, oh, well, maybe we're not going to allow any money for that, or this or that. You ain't got any, the people are going to decide, right? But when you scrap the jury and scrap the assizes and quarter sessions, and you've got like a mayor and alderman, and they're there all the time, and they're getting the certain companies to do things on the roads regular, and they get a relationship with them, and then they even might do a contract, so a long-term contract and a plan, and then they think, oh well, we want to fit some more lighting in, and get it on the council, and then the local people are like, oh, actually, maybe we don't want this fucking bus lane straight through the front of the across the front of the house 24 hours a fucking day with noise on there, but the bus company wants it because it's good for business and it makes some money out of it. How are you going to get a fair trial when your applicant has already got contracts and deals and a long-term strategy with the bus company? You ain't going to get a fair trial out of it, are you? Because they are in cahoots with, they're working with the applicant, right? So you might as well say, like, if you you might as well go to the magistrate's court, right? And say, it's like, trying to prosecute the police, if they mishandled you, but the police, always submitting warrants to the court all the time, and they know the judge, right? Like that stupid case in Wales when that police officer were punching that guy in the head, and the CPS supposedly tried to prosecute him, but he got off with it, right? Stuff like that. So it's meant to be a court, and you cannot possibly have a fair trial when like either one of the parties has got some kind of contract or long-term deal or agreement or even a strategy with the court, right? Which is absolutely insane. To even think that they even managed to pull that off is mind-blowingly astounding, right? So then the women kick off because obviously we've got more frequent parliaments and they're holding them more often, and therefore it's because the MPs are making all decisions and changing the laws now, kind of like almost long-term or permanent, right? Then people want to say in it, right? Whereas when they didn't have any MPs, they didn't call a parliament, people could actually send petitions in and make requests and do things, even women, right? So when they started to have elections, I don't know why they started. I don't know why. Well, apparently the suffragettes, worked out that there isn't actually anything specifically blocking women from voting, because it never said that women can't vote in the Bill of Rights. But traditionally, they didn't vote. Right? They did find some cases of where women had voted in the past, but it was a religious, family, traditional thing that, your family was either like a liberal family or a conservative family, and the woman would, back up her man or support her man, or they would both kind of like, the man would vote on behalf of the family or the household in the best interests of the house, which makes sense if you live in Herefordshire and you've got a farm, and, Lib Dems have got certain policies for farms. It would be a bit ridiculous that, the wife and the husband and the kids all didn't, vote the same if it was a family farm, because, why would they, if a certain party's got certain policies for farms in that area, then why would they vote for another party, right? It's just common sense, right? It's not like, I want my rights to vote how I want, this is like when families kind of like stuck together and helped each other out and were interested in, and went to church and, had a religion and had a way of life, but now with loose women, it's like, oh no, I want the right to, vote for some other party, right? But when the women actually got these rights, when the suffragettes kicked off, so they did get the vote, which wasn't that long after all the whole middle class got the vote anyway, around the same time, in the mid-1800s, right? But the trade-off wasn't actually that clever, because what happened is when the women got the vote, and when the masses got the vote, so they could decide, they could have a say in who got into parliament, they pulled the civil juries out, and actually it was probably better when they didn't have a parliament, and when the assizes were coming round and they got a random jury, hopefully, it was random, and they voted on the decisions what happened to the area. It was what a random selection of people wanted for the area. You know, like the average status quo. You know, the average. You know, what does the average person in this area think's best for the area, right? But they pulled that out. So then all the big factory and mill workers couldn't be interfered with by their workers, by the local people, right? Which is diabolical strategy to pull. And then when they pulled the civil juries out in the High Court as well, and because they didn't want poor people to have power over rich people, right, in local areas and what gets decided, and then the corporations take over as well, and you've got your political parties having control over who, you know, the councillors and the MPs, you get these big political parties. Now, you would have thought that the whole point of the women kicking off to get the vote was so they could vote freely for who they wanted. So you would have thought that once women got the vote, then it would be like, oh, this is great, you know, we can vote for who we want. And there's all these, you know, different, you know, suffragettes. You would have thought there was all different women standing, you know, this woman or that woman or whatever, or, you know, a variety is the spice of life, you know, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great or small. But that didn't happen, right? Not like, you know, loose women's like the fucking Spice. They didn't even have the Spice Girls, you know. They didn't even have Sporty Spice, you know, Scary Spice, Baby Spice, and, you know, Posh Spice, right? They had like Labour or Tories, you know, Whigs or Tories, right? That's what they had. And all of the women either voted for Labour or for Tories or whatever, or for Whigs or Tories. By the time they'd finished, it was like a football team. So what is the point in moaning for like 10, 20 years that women haven't got the vote, and then when you finally get it, it becomes a coin toss. Tossing the coin off, heads or tails, you know. Now, they managed to shepherd or capture the masses into these red and blue, you know, pies. Like, immediately heard them like sheep. But the whole point of getting the vote was so you could, you know, do something, have your own, you know, complete individual personal thing, like, you know, the woman. And you see, if women wanted to vote separate for their husband, they'd want to vote different, right? But if you're from a Labour area, or a farm in Herefordshire, why the fuck would the wife vote different from the husband if they were, you know, you don't want to run the farm into the ground, do you? Like, you know, they would make the decision of the NPR party that's going to be best for the farm, so they'd vote the same, right? But the old basis behind, you know, women want the vote separate from the husband is so they can fucking vote different. But they didn't. When they didn't get the vote, they all fucking voted for, you know, whether the poor they vote for Labour and rich for Tories, so they got immediately captured. Now, that means that when you're looking at elections and voting, right, the game is to get everyone onto one team or the other, right, which is like literally like a football model. And it's ironic that that's actually when all these football took off, you know, the roots of Manchester United and Old Trafford, and before then, all around this time, they managed to get all these big leagues into place with all the sports and football, so people would take a side and then all wear the same shirt or side, or get them to support it in their own area. So it's always like the format of football is two teams, right? One versus the other. And I know that there's all different, all around the whole country, there's different teams, but it was one versus the other. So the whole getting the psychology of the country on that was key for politics, right? Whereas when you had, when the middle class and the poor people and the women didn't have the vote, it was all particular to, you know, when it was all, you know, affluent people who'd been to Oxford or educated or whatever, or from money backgrounds, they all were very interested in politics, and they were all, you know, educated, and they actually knew something about the area, and you know, they all had something completely different to go into Parliament to represent, right? obviously, as these factories take off and get presidents, the people who've got the factories are wanting to, make sure they've got power and keep everyone under control, and they ended up taking the money, and they got away with it. Now, this is the thing: when we're looking at these earlier elections before the masses got the vote, every vote counted because there was a lot less people voting, right? There were fewer people who were eligible to vote. So when you've only got a small number of votes, every vote counts. And this is why all the crimes and offences were like, bribery or treating, or you got paid off, paid him to vote for him, or, he held a party and entertained people, all these election offences. We might now, in fact, now these election offences, the traditional ones, which are still illegal, are actually quite trivial now. They're what you call frivolous, right? It would be extremely frivolous now, right? If like I said, if Ed Davey went into a pub and gave someone £50 if they voted for him, right? One person, right? But that's an election offence now. That is a crime, election offence. But it would be pointless. What would be the point in Ed Davey going into a pub and giving someone 50 quid, right, to vote for him? Because it wouldn't hardly affect the results, right? Like one person. It's frivolous, right? So if someone brought an election petition against Ed Davey because he paid someone 50 quid, right, to vote for him, it wouldn't, and he won by, 500 votes, it wouldn't affect the outcome of the election, so he still would have been elected. But even if it's a crime and an offence, right, it wouldn't call the election off, but he could possibly get prosecuted and, he could get fined criminally, but then you've got all, certificates of indemnity and stuff like that. So it's frivolous now, but it wouldn't have been frivolous then if only 20 people were voting, and he only won by one vote, because that would have been affected whether he got the Parliament seat or not. So frivolous election offences, which didn't used to be frivolous, are still illegal and still criminal, but they're kind of pointless, right? If you brought an election petition, on one of those points, they would think that you were stupid and insane, particularly with the £5,000 deposit now. So therefore, because there's so many people voting, huge numbers of people voting, it's not enough to bribe one person. It's pointless. You need to get huge groups of people, masses of people, right? And that's what Reform had to do, right? To succeed, Reform needed to get huge amounts of people, so they got them from the Tories, converted them over, and they used social media and so forth. And this is when you're getting now into the social media. But this is the thing. They've been doing it mainly by using sport and football teams model and psychology. Like, you can only have when you're having a match, you have two teams, right? That's what we have, one versus the other. That's what it is. And they got this idea into Parliament, although, you've had the Lib Dems the whole time, and occasionally you get independents. But that was the main psychology. And it was always this one party's for the working class and others for the, the rich people. And really that's capturing, people. I don't think that the suffragettes, when they started out, actually ever intended just to vote, for a working class party or whatever. Particularly when, different areas of the country have completely different needs, right? Although every area has a working class and, an elite at the time, but there were still regional differences, but those regional differences seem to fall to the byway once you get all the poor people voting, because then it doesn't really matter that the areas are completely different and got different trades and so forth. Is the fact that, you know, every single area has got different trades, but then they all follow this model where, you know, the workers work for the owners and they're their bosses, rather than everyone having skills and being their own boss, but in different trades and having their own opinion on, you know, what the law should be and what the trading rights should be and so forth like that. They're the ones who have a say and opinion and you know, petition Parliament about it, rather than just the factory owner doing it and putting private bills through and have all the workers just voting for one party that gets MPs in. You know, so so it's definitely been, the game has been how to manage to convince the masses to all stick together, right? You know, all workers, you know, if you are this, you do that. If you're poor, you do this. If you're poor, you vote Labour. Or if you're rich, you vote Tory, which is stereotyping. It's all completely stereotyping, and it's trying to make out that everyone's the same and everyone wants the same thing, or everyone likes the same thing, when they don't, actually. Rather than individual independent people actually having an interesting area and representing unique things or ideas in that area, right? So the political parties ended up, you know, becoming extremely dominant, and, you know, when they're long established and going and everyone's voting for them, they're guaranteed to get many MPs into Parliament, even if, you know, it's slightly more Tories or slightly more Labour or whatever. But this is a problem. Now, when it comes to the actual voting laws and elections, and when it comes to actually the rights behind petitioning and the laws, right? Once these big political parties are guaranteed to get into Parliament, and all people, they can get an MP in as long as the MP's in a working class area, and, you know, people, it's hard to get elected, right, as a candidate on the merits of yourself, unless people know who you are, right? Unless people know who you are and what you're about, then people aren't going to vote for you, right? Now, if people are all following the Labour Party, and they're just, if you decide to stand for Labour and you join that party and you agree to their policies, and they've all automatically got a lot of followers, you are not really earning the election yourself, right? They're giving it to you, right? Because you're agreeing. It's like accept, consent, submit, right? So, like, if you join the Labour Party, you know, like, consent, submit, accept to their policies, they'll get you into Parliament effectively, unless it's David Cameron, who won't give any money to Bridgham because, you know, it's a Labour area and he's not going to win the seat or whatever, right? But in the areas that they are guaranteed in, you know, whoever puts the magic shirt on gets in, right? Whoever puts the magic jacket on, red jacket or blue jacket, they automatically get elected because, you know, everyone's going to, you know, they'll back them up, they'll put them in, right? Now, this is where these political parties have really been spoiled rotten, because they're automatically, Parliament's going to comprise of, like, you know, give or take, you know, 40, 60, whatever % Labour Tory or whatever, and they're always going to be Tory and Labour in there. So after the years and years and years and years go by, they've dominated Parliament. And, you know, some MPs, you know, don't last for long. You know, some MPs, you know, it switches Tory and Labour or whatever. But mainly, these main political parties have had the luck to absolutely dominate Parliament and be comfortable in there over time, get to know, like, what other people didn't read politics. They didn't go on the internet, on websites, and read laws and acts. They didn't even know about the laws unless you got to university. They didn't know where to buy the books unless you're a professor or whatever. But the politicians are into the law, and the politicians and political parties are interested in it, right? And also big companies and business people get interested in it, right? And then they get their, you know, private bills put through and so forth. They used to have a lot more in the newspapers as well. You know, they had a lot more in the parliamentary intelligence in the newspapers. So if you bought the newspaper and you kept up with what's going on, and you bought like the newspapers that were the people in London buy, all the traders and lawyers and barristers and etc., right? Then generally know what's going on in Parliament, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know all about the committees and laws and everything like that. But this is the thing. But now this is where, as we go along, and mainly I would say, looking at it now, I would suggest that it's probably around that time of Margaret Ethel Self, right? With her driving charge, what got in the newspaper, that petitioned the king, around that time, just before World War II, right? There'd been massive amounts of petitions through the 1800s, mainly arguing about suffrage, and then there was, the Luddites, but all kinds of different miscellaneous things, trading stuff, taxes, also a lot from the armies as well, when they're the British Empire, the armies, right? A lot of petitions about that, right? But there were also some in independent ones, people having legal issues with the lawyers and so forth, people getting put in prison for debt. People. That's when you could get arrested for debt and under civil actions and things like that. But generally, I don't know what happened, but Parliament changed the rules for the presentation of petitions because they wanted to get them out of the way, right? Even though Parliament is called to redress grievances and amend and strengthen the laws equally in the Constitution, right? But these political parties, they're getting comfortable in their positions in Parliament, and they're getting familiar with it, and they're getting to say, "Wow, we don't want these." We're the main parties. People vote for us, and we want to get our business through Parliament, right? And we want all these independent people to get up to fuck off because we don't give a fuck about them, right? Although we're not going to say that because we've got to look like we care about people, right? But we care about money. That's what we care about: money, and profit and business, right? And they tweak the standing orders of Parliament and the presentation of petitions to shove us out, right? To make more room for their business. But we've still got the right to do it, but it can only get read out and presented if it's like like very extremely urgent, right, grievance or something. But all the other petitions from private people for bills and stuff like that, and then there's a separate thing for private bills. But they try and streamline it so they can get their political party business through, right? Now, that doesn't affect us too badly because, in 1832, but, Parliament burned down, by the way, let's not forget that. Now, I don't know why the petitions dropped so low, kind of like in the sort of like 1910, 20, 30, 40, 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, they suddenly dropped. Now, I think that's to do with them changing the rules in Parliament for how they get presented. But people still will have had grievances, but obviously they were getting their MPs to... Well, when people are supporting the main parties and voting for main parties, they go see their MP, right? And their MP represents them. And, if they're pretty much doing what the parties say they're going to do, then people will probably have less incentive to write in themselves. But for whatever the reason, the petition numbers dropped dramatically. But then we've got this... But at that point, like 1939... they haven't tweaked around with these privileges and rights and so forth. But we've had World War I. Now, this Ethel Margaret Self got accused of dangerous driving, but she said she wasn't the driver, and she got pissed off that she got prosecuted and convicted when she claimed she wasn't driving. Now, this is quite important because she was a school teacher and has a bit of knowledge, although it doesn't seem like she knew about the appeal-like jurisdiction properly to appeal to the Lords, which you can do that anyway through the court system if you want to. Although, if it wasn't on a point of law, she might not have been able to... I don't know if you appeal to the House of Lords for appeal-like jurisdiction, I don't know if it was a little bit like a writ of error or a bill of exception, sort of. I don't. If it wasn't on actually the law, what the law was, Ethel Margaret Self's case was on were you or were you not the driver based on witness evidence or not? Can you prove that you weren't? So that's on the evidence presented and on, what the jury's decision think based on evidence. So that would be, who, why, where and what. So it might, I'm not quite sure. This is where I've been honest and saying I don't know whether or not she might have been able to appeal it to the House of Lords on that basis in principle or not, then if it wasn't on a point of law or not. Because I don't know if the House of Lords had to be in a point of law or a right, or whether you could just appeal it from the case or not. But they still had writ of error and bill of exemption. I think the writ of error and bill of exemption are quite similar, but I don't know about appeal-like jurisdiction. But they had appeal-like jurisdiction and various acts, but she doesn't seem to have gone for that route. She petitioned the House of Commons over it and the King. And the King referred it to Parliament, which is what happened when I petitioned the Queen. Like, they usually just refer it, pass it on. On some occasions, you can get a Privy Council investigation, but Mayor of London, and if you're like, the councils and courts could do petitions, and they could usually get the strings pulled. But if you're just a member of the public, I think it was a bit harder. But anyway, she petitioned the Commons, and apparently it got put in there. And I'm just researching this now. I haven't found out all of the rest of the information yet, because it's not in the Petty Sessions for Lowestoft, so I've got to check the Norfolk records now, and Parliament have been moving the archives as well. So this is the thing. So basically, right, this petition, it seems like after the people were using privileges of Parliament in the 1800s, and lawyers knew about the right to petition and privilege and the special jurisdiction, and people were getting cases heard by the House of Commons. But I think the House of Commons cases got put through to the Lords, and people were kneeling at the bar, and they were having like contempt proceedings and all kinds of different things to do with parliamentary jurisdiction, right? But then after they changed the rules for presentation, it just kind of slumped, right? But you could still submit them, but people just weren't doing. I need to find out why that is, but I don't think that it's too much of an issue. The thing is that when Ethel Margaret Self did her petition, it was before 1948 when they fiddled about with the peer privileges, and then again in 1967. So at the point of Margaret Ethel Self is very interesting, because you've still got pretty much full acknowledgement if you know about it, and it wasn't that far from the back of the 1800s. Now the thing with her case is that she did not start her case it wasn't her own cause, right? It was the authorities' case against her. She was the defendant. And her petition was by appealite, right? It was appealite, even if she didn't go to the Lords. Like, it was like she was appealing her case, right? Finding ways to appeal a case brought against her. Now, the difference between Ethel Margaret Self's case and mine is that I had a case myself, which I was acting on behalf of to Parliament, and it was my case. I had a case in Parliament. It's my case, right? I'm the one doing the case, right? And I was injunctioned or interfered with by the police, right? When I already had an existing case. So they fucked around with my case completely and totally illegally, because they didn't have the authority to do it. And therefore, my troubles were trying to get that recognised, which were completely and totally ignored. So I had priority. I already had precedent and priority, and that precedent and priority was getting ignored, right? Whereas with Ethel Margaret herself didn't, right? She didn't already have her own case in the first place with Parliament. She went to Parliament seeking help or appeal from a case against her, which was the only case, right? Now, this is when all hell breaks out in World War II, when she gets a newspaper case, right? And tries to get it debated in Parliament, which we don't know whether she did or not. But this is when they turn the light off on Big Ben, right? This Ayrton light. Now, this is the thing. Now, at that point, we've had the 1832 committee report, and then Erskine May wrote his book, and then we got like Herbert Broom writing about privileges, and we've had the right to hear to determine an election petition, which would have been gone to Parliament, transferred to the courts. You know, there's some questions about the legality of that, right, as well, but they did it, and they were having all these election petitions in local areas, challenging seats instead of petitioning Parliament, right? So that's one thing they'd removed. So at the point of 1939, Parliament didn't have to deal with all the election petitions. So people weren't submitting a public petition to Parliament complaining about an election of their MP. They weren't doing that. They were going to the local courts. So that's one bulk. That's one section of petitions which were not being sent into the House of Commons, right? So they got rid of those out of there, and they'd also diminished the importance of it, or tried to, in order to streamline their business too. But remember, all through this time, the House of Lords are getting more and more and more and more and more and more members, right? You know, they've never had more spare pricks in a brothel, right? How many Lords does it take to change a light bulb? Well, you know, the Lords and Parliament are having less and less and less work to do for us, but they're getting more and more and more members, so they've just got more time to sit and twiddle their thumbs, right? And, you know, fuck knows, go off to the Bahamas and pretend they're 007, like on Lady fucking Baroness M's yacht or whatever, you know, or doing, fuck knows what they're doing. They're doing, like, you know, stuff that Tony Blair's doing now, like, you know, they're setting up, you know, well, we're setting up a British Empire, you know, and, you know, dealing with India and, you know, Beijing and China, and, oh, didn't they do well for the empire, and then we'll put them in the House of Lords type stuff. Fuck knows. You know, they're doing stuff for the country, but, you know, to get rich and more power, right? Basically taking our rights away from local juries, and not raising the minimum wage. Basically, you know, extorting money out of and making a black hole in the country and giving it all them to themselves, right? You know, setting up all this banking system where, you know, everything's meant to be for the profit of all the realm, but yet the government is in a black hole, right? It's actually for the profit of the rich people, not the whole realm, right? So they were fiddling the constitution, but the rights. We've still got the right to petition Parliament in grievance about MPs' behaviour and conduct and what they're actually doing in Parliament, right? And supposedly you can have the power of impeachment, right? And for the government departments as well. Now, this is the thing. In 1939, then, you know, Ethel Margaret herself uses this right to petition when there's actually very low numbers of petitions, you know, like 50 or 60 a year, or maybe 80 a year or something, which is not many at all compared to when they had like 10, 20, 30, 40,000 or whatever. So, but then all like fucking hellfire breaks out, and all the Spanish fucking around with their civil war, and then, you know, Hitler kicking off in Europe and all this and all, and the British government decide, oh yeah, well, we're actually at war now, so everyone will have to stop what they're doing and do this and get your head between your ears and, like, you know, get your fucking, you know, your bomb shelter out and get your head, you know, like a fucking airplane hostess. Everyone, like, you know, put your head between your knees, you know, like, get your sick bag out, and fucking when the air siren rings, you know, Simon says, go to the bomb shelter. Simon says, put your hand between your head. You know, Simon says, put your head in your hands, you know. Simon says, when the air bell rings, step backwards 3 times, you know. Move it, soldier, you know, so obedience. Mainly because, I think the war was a lot to do with the Bauhaus and a little bit like with the Luddites, weren't getting a minimum wage and, but yet factories were getting rich, but they didn't get any more money and they refused to do it. A lot of people didn't want to change this mass industry, and I actually think the war was convenient to, just scrap Plymouth, bomb Plymouth, it's a historic place, but they scrap it all, right? It's got bombed, they rebuilt it all. It was a good excuse for the government to rebuild all the place, like what they do with Ukraine now, basically, just going to rebuild it and then someone will make a shitload of money out of it and it'll all get modernised, right? They'll have a brand new Ukraine. They'll get a brand new country built, and BlackRock will get, make trillions out of it, right? And then Zelensky will get a badge and say, "Oh, didn't you do well, Zelensky?" And we had to sacrifice a few people, but now we've got a brand new country. It's like getting a new hospital built. Oh, we're getting a new hospital. We've got a brand new country, new Ukraine. Thank you very much. It's what we always wanted. Some people had to die for it, but we can put some memorials out, right? This is the thing, convenience. That's my opinion. But, so, now, after the war finishes, I think some of the lords were abusing their privileges during the war, I think, because I heard some stories that, a lot of affluent people in London got relocated to places like in the countryside, like in Lincolnshire, and apparently they were quite mean to people. That's apparently what I heard. I don't know if it's true or not. So, after the war, now the next change is that, the newspapers were kicking off, about using the right to petition, but obviously that got stamped out. That got literally, shot in the air. So the petition numbers did not rise after the war, and it doesn't appear that there were any soldiers petitioning about the war in large numbers like there were in the British Empire when there was all kinds of petitions coming in, right? Unless they get some other department to deal with it. Now, this is where the numbers of petitions don't go up then in 1950, 60, 70, 80, 90, right? Now, they create this Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman in 1967, which is the same year they're tinkering around with the peerage rights as well after 1948. And then, so all complaints about departments of the government, which, the House of Commons were responsible for, are going to get signed off by the MP under a new act of law. And they've created this ombudsman, all funded by the taxpayer, who's going to sort your complaints out for you so the MPs don't have to deal with it, right? Which is quite ironic because you would have wanted the people that you were elected and voted for with their judicial powers to judge it, not some other person that they appoint, right? You'd have wanted the people that you voted for to do it, because that's the whole point in voting in committees and democracy, right? Not some appointed person with a load of staff looking at your complaint, so you didn't vote for them, right? And they do the investigating, not you and the committee calling for papers or documents. So even though there was already very, very low numbers of petitions, people weren't making use of it. People might have been just not doing it as a petition, might be complaining to their MP in writing or going to see them in the surgery, or just complaining directly to the department, right? But whatever happens, they set up this department, so instead of petitioning Parliament, or instead of writing to the department or complaining, directly to the person, whether it's head of schools, headmaster, school teacher, Department of Secretary of State, whatever, they said that MP signs it off and it goes to them. So a lot of people might have been doing complaints, but they just didn't get recognised as petitions to Parliament or put down as petitions to Parliament, because people were probably might have just been writing directly to the people who they complain about, and maybe it might have been getting sorted out, right? Obviously, you've got telephones get invented, which they didn't have in the 1800s, and the radio and better postal system and things like that. So it's likely complaints, or people drive, not on a horse and cart. You can drive there, so they might have gone on the bus and seen them in person and got a complaint sorted out. So maybe it didn't escalate to Parliament. But either way, they're definitely not going to be dealing with the petitions to Parliament about government departments because they set up a new thing. Now, and then, but you can still supposedly complain about the MP themselves to Parliament in a grievance if they've done something wrong, because it can't be dealt with by anywhere else except Parliament. But this is the thing. As they're doing this, and then when they get to 1995, and they create the House of Commons Commissioner to deal with the complaints about MPs, so it goes to the Commissioner, and not like a petition to Parliament, because like you would want them to vote on it and maybe get them impeached, right, if they've done something wrong. The Commissioner's going to deal with that now, right? So they're taking the powers, they're delegating them to these other persons that we didn't vote for, right? And they're trying to make it so that it doesn't even class or qualify as a petition and get put down in the journal as a petition. It just gets instead put through as a complaint, to a particular department or whatever. Although they did dispute and debate over whether it was privileged or not for that Commissioner of House of Commons, only if he took it on. Right, but yeah, where's the yin and yang? We've got. You can't take away our constitutional right, and because we've got it set in law, in the observation of due process of law. Now, while all this is going on, this is when you've got very, very, very cushy parties in very comfortable, safe seats who are in Parliament for a number of years, and then they're going to make a few little changes to how Parliament's run, right? Isn't that convenient for them, right? Although there aren't really any changes in standing orders, which are that significant, to be honest. But, they create all these other departments anyway. And this is when they're knocking out these committee reports, and instead of the 1832 one, and then 1944, it's not too bad. You've got someone confessing they did something wrong in 1944, and you've got John Tinker calling out that we've got a right to remind everyone that we've got a right. So I think 1944 was one of those kind of like, Ethel Margaret Selford tried a petition, it got shut down, the war happened, boom, but then John Tinker's kind of like trying to hold up the fucking torch, and the bastion of light, but then this is when they start, maybe for what happened in the war, maybe that's why they thought they were going to, get rid of some of the peer privileges. I don't know, but it doesn't sit well with Magna Carta. When they're fucking around with Magna Carta and the confirmation of the charters and stuff like that, it can't be good for the Constitution. And then they started saying, they do this opening of Parliament when the Speaker does a petition to the King for asking for their ancient rights and privileges, but then they're knocking out these committee reports now saying, there's not really much substantial. It's just tradition, Well, look, either you say something and it means something, or you're a lying bastard, right? Oh, it's just symbolic, it's like the mayor, he's got no powers, but we still have him, It isn't this old, archaic, medieval tradition which fell into disuse millennia ago somewhere in the cobwebs of Parliament, and then therefore now it's only done as a matter of tradition, right? In 1948, Elizabeth, the Queen, right, and Pompous House said, we'll fuck around with the law now in 1948 and fucking, smash the fuck out of Magna Carta and the peer privileges, It's not, an age-old tradition that doesn't really much have any meaning anymore. It's gradually slipped from the memory and fallen into disuse over the years, and now there's nothing left more than tradition. No! Someone in 1948 got a sledgehammer and went, bang! Fuck, that's fucked now. Fucked it, right? But we'll just carry on doing the tradition, and now it means nothing because we fucked it up on that day at that time. It didn't. Tradition slowly, gradually fell into disuse and has slowly become obsolete. Someone got a sledgehammer and fucked it. Bang! 948. Bang! Right? They fucked it. And 967. Bang, bang, twice, right? Didn't slowly slip from the memory and gradually fall out of disuse and has slowly become obsolete. Someone twatted it with a fucking hammer. Bang! 948 and bang! In 1967, right? Just exactly on dates when they're trying to get our rights and liberties and privileges replaced, attempting to, by these commissioners, the commissioners and the ombudsman. Oh, my buddy. Look, it's Labour and the Tories. Oh, here's our buddy-budsman. Yes, we're guaranteed to get seats in Parliament. Put the red jacket on or the blue jacket on. Where's my buddy? Well, I've got so many buddies, I don't know which one to choose. Shall I have a Labour buddy or a Tory buddy? It doesn't really matter, as long as they're my buddy. Get the buddiesman in. And look, here's Daniel Greenback, Baron Greenback or whatever. Looks like Klaus Schwab to me. I think Klaus Schwab's infiltrated Parliament. This is the thing. So what they're doing in these committee reports all through this time, all through probably from around, I would probably say 1944, after 1944, all through while they're creating the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman, the House of Commons Commissioner for Standards. They'd already got the election petitions out of there into the courts as well. So, and they're right then. Through the 1950s, 60s, 70s and 80s, they're slowly starting to rubbish all of the rights and privileges, right? Like, it's all just for symbolic purposes and all this tosh, right? And they're going heavy, super heavy on the propaganda in the parliamentary committee reports. They're twisting the truth, lying, making excuses up, coming out with all this heavy propaganda, right? Until we get now, like, with the Public Order Acts, where they're trying to make out that, there's no such thing. It's just a bunch of people misbehaving in public and go fucking arrest them, right? And then we'll make up a lot of other tosh, like, prescribed groups or whatever, and the police just think that the police, there's no such thing, right? As rights or privileges, because, and then so what's e-petitions? Well, this is the thing. They've already been rubbishing all our rights and downplaying them and putting heavy propaganda. And then when you get to Tony Blair in 2006 or whatever, with his, not 2006, is it 1996? It could have been, 2005, he's Gordon Brown in it, 2005, 2010, 9, 8, 7, 6... Yeah, I think it's 2005, 6. I think it was Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Well, they did the Number 10 website, right? The Number 10 website wasn't in the House of Commons. It was apparently Number 10. So you were petitioning the Prime Minister himself, right? And then he was passing it off to these departments, which they said in the 1994 committee report, they said, don't pass them off to other departments, right? So whenever it says don't do something, they've got to go and do it, right? So Tony Blair's like, I'll pass them off to other departments. Well, didn't he say not to do that, Tony, right? So, this is Blair is like the anarchist, Blair's like, if it says, Tony Blair is the ultimate anarchist of England, the New Statesman, the Alan Bastard, the anarchy in the UK, the John Lynham of politics, right? Although he doesn't come across as it is now. Well, I'm very excited to do all I can to work to come for humanity. It's like, the vampire at the end of The Lost Boys, you know, the well-spoken Englishman, you know, he's got all the lingo, the dictionary, but, you know, he's also got all the law-breaking, rule-breaking, illegal acts being put through Parliament, and, you know, try to come up with the take over the world domination with the freaking leisure suit Larry Ellison with his Oracle thing, right? So Blair broke lots of law. He made contradictions in law against the Constitution and actually set laws and acts in direct conflict with each other, which was not compatible at all. But can you blame him when someone put a sledgehammer to Magna Carta in 1948 and then hit it again in 1967, you know? Someone's clearly setting an example there, right? Now, this is the thing with Blair. So he wanted to make it look like he's doing us all a favour, and he's making this, why don't we try invigorate the public petitions and try and get people involved in politics? It will make it look like we're doing them a favour, right? Yeah, but they'd already rubbished our privileges in all of the committee reports, already put heavy propaganda in that it literally, you know, it's next to nothing or worth nothing. They'd got rid of all the petitions for grievances against MPs, which could lead to impeachment, if we got enough signatures to make them vote on it, right, by palming it off to the parliamentary commissioner. They got rid of all the grievances about government departments by palming it off to the ombudsman. They got rid of all the election petitions about MPs to the courts. What's left? So all you've got is, you know, let's change the tax on tampons, right? Fucking Laura Corrigan, you know. Oh, you know, that's very important things for the country. It's not frivolous at all, right? You know, tampon taxes, you know, make sure it's something important, not frivolous, right? This is the thing. So all these now, since around, you know, I'm invigorating politics. I'm getting people interested in politics, you know. What he basically meant is like, all the people who vote for Conservatives and Tories who are dedicated, dedicated voters who always vote for, you know, the Tory or Labour, you know, they're pledged. That you know, who the fuck's interested in politics? Who even turns out to vote, right? You know, people who are either members of the Conservative Party or Labour, right? So all of the people who actually give a damn about politics and are interested in it, including like the university graduates and professors, right, who are probably either, you know, disputing whether they should vote for Tory or Labour or Lib Dem, you know, toss a coin, right? Those people, hey, we'll have a e-petitions service where they can, maybe we can get some good ideas for policies out of them, right? You know, well, obviously, if they're already a member of the Labour Party, it's safe. It's safe to do that now, right? Don't worry, it's safe to do this online modernised e-petition system because either all these people who are going to be interested in it anyway are either going to be members of the Conservative Party or fucking Labour, right? So it's safe, right? It's not like they're all going to be fucking independent and, you know, challenge us all on them and come up with stuff that is not in line with, you know, world domination, digital ID or whatever. And by the way, they could probably, we could probably rig it so that, you know, all these, we could probably use that e-petition site, you know, to block everyone else and, you know, we would get some signatures for this digital ID thing to make it look like everyone supports it, right? We could use e-petitions as a perfect propaganda machine to make it look like, you know, everyone supports digital ID, or maybe they don't, right? Or maybe like it's impossible to get over a few million signatures because mysteriously the signatures stop, right? You know, because we're not sharing it, or we've dropped the algorithm or something, right? You know, so. And then this is where we are now. So after Blair and Gordon Brown and after the propaganda machine, 2010, because they didn't have a petitions committee, they scrapped it in 1974, because they said petitioning is a waste of time. It's completely pointless. There's no point doing it. We meet 4 times a year for 1 minute, and there's hardly any numbers of petitions anyway. Not surprising after they've palmed off all the election petitions to the courts. They've palmed off all the department petitions to the ombudsman, and they've palmed off all the complaints against MPs, which usually could have got a impeachment out of it, to the buddy commissioner, best pal, my best pal here, we put in, make sure he wasn't getting impeachments through, right? So what you're left with, this is the thing, they've already said it was a waste of time and complete load of rubbish, right? So like nothing like putting the nail in the coffin and resurrecting it from the dead. This is the thing. So and then we end up, we'll have a committee now. So 2010, and I only actually become aware of it, the whole thing. I only got started sniffing into this around 2013, which they'd only been going for 3 years, right? And this is where the last, so that means that 2013, 12 years of actual full-on war against these corrupt, insidious, treacherous, treasonous, propagandist liars with the most tenuous and unbelievably bollocks policy that you could ever conjure up, which wouldn't hold up. It's about as convincing as a fucking, it's about as convincing as a stuffed, as a toy fucking, it's about as convincing as a toy panda, right? Oh, it's a real panda. Yeah, right. It's about as convincing as a teddy bear, like a Care Bear, right? That's a real bear. Yeah, because it's a real bear, not. This is the thing. It's not convincing at all. It's absolute bollocks, right? And this is the problem now. With the internet and with information and technology, and Tony Blair said freedom of information, but any information that's worth any getting, you got to pay for it, or you got to pay the local record office for, or they've been moving the archives, or you got to get to Kew Gardens to go onto the computer system, or it's ProQuest. Anything that's worth a quest to find that could be proactive or professionally used to criticise or disagree with this government is not for free, right? They're trying to make it. So Tony Blair is the bollocks merchant, right? It's freedom of information. All that bollocks information, like, statistics on speed cameras that we fucking deleted half of it, right? Just bollocks information. Not like the Parliamentary Archives with a computer terminal at Kew Gardens, which immediately goes on a ProQuest. You can type in any fucking report and it just comes up like that, and we put all the useless ones that no one wants to fucking see or read up on the website, right? Because we're bullshitting you, right? This is a con, right? And by the way, while we're trying to get digital ID through and take over the world, we'll make sure the Parliamentary Archives are not available over that period, and make sure you're all locked down in pandemic, right? And that's not a medical excuse or an emergency enough to give you a password for ProQuest to log in for free, because it's like you're not like you're fucking paying for the National Archives. It's not like you're paying for all the tax money, right? Just go to a local record office in fucking Suffolk. It's not like, we're paying for those researchers to be there and do something. You got to pay for your research, right? Freedom of information, you got to pay for your research. Fucking Norfolk Record Office, so make some money out of that. This is the thing. So Tony Blair's bullshit fucking freedom of information, when the whole time the plan was to get our information and then end up with, massive Amazon, fucking X, Twitter, YouTube, mega companies won't tell you nothing. We won't tell you anything, right? Go fuck yourselves. We're not telling you anything. We're not even going to tell you the names of the staff. In fact, soon we won't have a staff. It'll just be Oracle, right? And by the way, you haven't got any rights on this platform because we're invading your country with our policy. You will submit, you will consent, you will. It's like the Master on Doctor Who, isn't it? In fact, that's a good insight that I've just had. In Doctor Who, the Master, like the original one, not the modern ones, like, you will obey me, you will obey, you will obey me. That's exactly what they're doing, these platforms. Like the Master. It's like, you will consent. You will consent and you will accept. You will consent, you will accept, and you will agree with me. That's what it is. It's actually the Master from Doctor Who. It's like, you will obey. I am Jeff Bezos. I am the Master. You will obey me. You will accept and consent. And Sergey Brin as well. And YouTube, fucking, Neil Mohan. They are the Master. You will obey, right? No matter what the law in your country is, the Master's got his own laws, right? So that's what's going on with that. And then any reason what's your policy? Any reason or no reason, right? Oh, that when the government love that policy, which they're pretty much doing it now anyway. Is any reason or no reason? So what we've ended up with is this petitions committee, which is completely sterilised, distilled neutral. Like, it's pretty much just there for suggesting laws or asking for tax changes or whatever. Anything that falls outside of things that Labour or the Tories are already doing, or if you want to have a grumble about it, right? Or if you can't afford to get a private bill put through, and anything which was ever useful, exciting, different, or you might need to actually use a power of investigation to be protected from prosecution, so you could obtain evidence, travel somewhere, and not be obstructed or challenged or interfered with, like getting some information from a local record office, on a past court case, which, might help you prove a point, to Parliament or something, or investigating Parliament itself. These MPs aren't following the law, they're treasonous, we need to have them impeached, right? They're not giving us our constitutional rights, etc. All that's been palmed off. So they're trying to make out that there's no reason why would you want to use privilege? Why would you need to use it? And by the way, if we don't think that you're telling the truth, even though it's not officially accepted as being submitted yet, we're not going to accept it anyway, right? Or let you air it. Even though they put in these reports, any grievance, great or small, has the right to be aired and the right to be supported. That's interesting. Why are they all getting blocked and rejected? It's frivolous. Frivolous is small, less important. This is the thing. I'm definitely not getting it aired. It's not even considered as being submitted until it finishes being run, right? So, and so what we're left with is the only thing that they believe that you would possibly be doing out in public with a banner sign or notice, doing any form of protest or demonstration, would be for tampon taxes or some kind of fucking, I want this law made or changed or whatever. And why would you buy it in public when you can do it online and share it online? You don't need to go in public, right? Even though, Facebook and YouTube aren't giving us our constitutional rights online on the platforms. They're denying them and illegally overriding it with this stupid Section 230, which is not even English law, right? And we aren't getting any help from MI5 or any MPs or anyone, right? So, and they don't believe that those people who are turning up in public really are doing proper petitions, right? Even though it's the community coming together to present their opposition demonstration, that they want it written down. They want it to be made note of by the government. They want the government to make a record of it, right? They're coming together in public. Keir Starmer. I noticed that it's the Clerk of Parliament. Oh, Mr. Starmer, there's 3 million people walking over London Bridge singing Keir Starmer's a wanker. Shall I make a record of it? They seem to be assembled outside in public. I better write that down and make a note of it in my notepad. Well, that'll be a matter of record, something worth noting of. But I haven't had an official petition from them saying, to the Honourable Commons Assembly in Parliament. Although there is one of their MPs here, maybe he might like to write it down on their behalf, because after all, he's their MP, it's MP of Westminster or whatever, right? There's a thing. So, no, we're not even being regarded. Yet, the Public Order Acts, right, are only for youth, gangs of youths, mobs, hooligans, people going about business as private citizens, to festivals, going out to pubs, going to sporting events, football matches, music festivals, whatever, Alton Towers, or just, some fucking thing happens in the middle of the town centre and everyone goes ape shit, fuck knows, right? Something, right? Not actually, hey, we've got a matter which concerns church, state or law of the country, and we'd like Parliament to do something about it, right? That's something for the community to get together over, right? And someone's written it down somewhere, because I thought I saw a pussycat. I did see a pussycat. I saw, I did see a petition about that on change.org. Someone written down as a matter of record. I think they emailed it to their MP. That'll be the one that we're advertising. Oh, that thing about ULEZ cameras. That's the one. ULEZ, stop ULEZ. That's it. Oh, someone did write it down and make a record out of it. Well, that's it. Yeah. Well, we need to get more people to support that, don't we? Right? Ring your MP. In fact, your MP might even have a petition on his website if he's the MP for fucking Orpington, right? Or if he's handed it into, Sue Hall, This is the thing. So, that's it. Oh, we ain't got any rights. They don't fucking exist. And by the way, you're all prescribed now as criminals. So, it's like the Emperor's new clothes to these people. And what they're doing is, in these committee reports, they are in contempt against us. And they're writing about contempt. They are in utter, absolute contempt of the people of this country, right? And it's these political parties, they've got themselves in the comfy chair, and, they don't need independent people. In fact, independent people are are just annoying. They're annoying and they're getting in the way of party politics, right? And if you don't support Labour or Tory, there's something fucking wrong with you, right? Rather than, no one should be supporting the Labour or Tory, And it's these parties that think, if you just turn up at the polling station and vote for us, then there's something wrong with you, right? Why would you need to use any of these rights or pick them up? Because why would you be challenging us, You don't want to impeach your MP, What do you think he's doing, Conning you, weaving propaganda, bullshitting you in committee reports, lying to you, taking your rights away, purporting to support the soccer team model where, in the end there can only be two teams, in the end, he likes football. In the end, there can only be two teams in the match. This is, it's like, there can only be two teams, the red team or the blue team, or, whichever, home and away, right? That's the model, home and away, right? Well, what about all these different teams? Yeah, but there's still two. You can only have two. It's home and away. This is it. So they use these psychologies, whereas every single MP should be purely independent and there to recognise the unique needs of the area which he represents. But unfortunately, now that everywhere's rubber stamped and it's just like a fucking stamp, fucking 3D print model of the next fucking town. Oh yeah, we'll have one of those. Oh look, Coventry. Look, bowling centre, cinema complex, McDonald's, KFC. Oh, I'll have one of those. Can you 3D print me one? Yeah, in fact, why don't you just fucking 3D print your fucking MP? you know? Oh, look, it's the MP for Modern Coventry, McDonald's, Bowling Centre, New Technology Innovation Centre. Oh, look, it's like on James Bond, isn't it? You know, oh, look, I'll have a strawberry daiquiri with a slice of lemon and, you know, 3 fucking olives in it. Oh, that's quite nice. I'll have one of those as well, like on Casino Royale. Oh, look, a new university with a new swimming baths and a swimming pool and a fucking railway station. And oh, look, he's a new fucking National Highways fucking bridge. Oh, I'll have one of those as well. Oh, you know, it's like fucking 007 and Casino Royale. Oh, I'll have a fucking strawberry daiquiri cocktail. Oh, look, a shit 3D printed new town. Oh, 15-minute city. Oh, I'll have one of those as well. Can you 3D print me? Oh, look, a Labour MP. Fuck me. Can you 3D print me a fucking Labour MP? Well, I'll have one of those. You know, look, a Labour MP. I'll have one of them. 3D print me one, you know. Smoke me a kipper, I'll be back for breakfast. Don't heat him up too much or he'll fucking melt, you know. Not much to represent in this town except Labour policies, you know. Smoke me a new fucking regional mayor, you know. Oh, look, we're scrapping. Oh, we got a bit bored of the Subbuteo fucking pieces now. We're not having police commissioners. We're going to, you know. Oh, look, it's a charity shop. Look, a charity shop. Look at all these. Look, Police Commissioner Gordon. Look at all these plastic Subbuteo fucking things. Look, all the police commissioners on them. Must have scrapped them all. And they ended up in the charity shop now. You can 3D print me one of those, you know. This is anyone want a fucking Subbuteo fucking commissioner? You know, they're going for cheap in the charity shop, you know. They're all 3D printed. This is it. Rather than actual living, breathing, unique, insightful, intelligent MPs who, what do you stand for? You know? Oh, I stand for Hereford, you know? Orchards and vineyards and rolling landscapes, you know, and farming, you know? We're off to London for a farmers' rally, but, you know, the police are shutting us down illegally and trying to make out we're terrorists, even though we're privileged in a legal process, because the police haven't got a fucking clue what the law is, right? You know, the police are actually there now to have a war against its own country. You don't need to we don't need to go to war with Russia, because our own police are at war with us. Literally, they are at war with the people illegally, criminally. And, you know, maybe you can't prescribe the police because it's their legal process,